Imagine waking up to the deafening roar of a heavy municipal bulldozer tearing down the historic wooden barn your grandfather built with his own 2 hands. Not because you violated a city code, but because an obsessive HOA president decided your family's generational farmland was ruining her subdivision's luxury view. When I rushed out to my pasture that morning, demanding to know what absolute madness was going on, the contractor just pointed a gloved finger at a sleek, white luxury SUV idling by the fence line. Out stepped Victoria, the self-appointed tyrant of the newly constructed luxury housing development bordering my land, wearing an expensive designer suit and a look of cold, unadulterated corporate malice. "You have 48 hours to clear this eyesore off our community's primary visual corridor," Victoria announced, her voice dripping with venom. "The Whispering Pines HOA board has officially voted to condemn your barn. It violates our aesthetic bylaws." She was actually serving an unofficial demolition order on private property she didn't even own. Welcome to the absolute peak of HOA insanity, where suburban developers and power-tripping residents treat the rest of the world like their personal municipal playground. To understand how a quiet rural rancher ended up locked in a high-stakes legal war with a suburban Karen, you have to go back to when Whispering Pines was first thrown together over a year ago. For decades, our borders were defined by thick oak trees, open pastures, and absolute uninterrupted peace. But then a massive real estate conglomerate bought out the old dairy farm next door, clear-cut the timber, and erected 80 cookie-cutter luxury homes. Along with those homes came a very specific breed of resident, people who traded city life for the suburbs and instantly brought their aggressive, hyper-controlling HOA culture right along to with them. They planted manicured lawns requiring industrial amounts of water. They installed uniform mailboxes. And most dangerously, they elected Victoria as their president. Victoria operated with the relentless force and brute power of a grizzly bear, completely flattening anyone who dared to question her absolute authority. She patrolled the neighborhood with a clipboard, hunting down minor violations like a hawk. She fined people for leaving their trash cans out 20 minutes past the deadline. She threatened local delivery drivers. The only problem? My farm wasn't part of Whispering Pines. My property line was established back in 1912. I never signed their CCRs. I never paid a dime of their monthly dues. Yet, Victoria looked at my century-old family barn and decided it was an unsightly obstruction to the view from her master bedroom window. It started with polite, condescending notes left in my mailbox. Then came formal warning letters demanding that I paint the barn a subdivision-approved neutral beige. And finally, when I ignored their paper threats, the financial penalties began piling up, thousands of dollars in fake HOA fines for violating community aesthetic standards. They were trying to fine me for existing on my own land. Most people would have thrown the letters straight into the trash. I did too, for the first 3 notices. But Victoria wasn't someone who backed down when ignored. When she realized I wasn't going to play ball or repaint my grandfather's historic barn, she escalated the situation in a way that crossed every single legal boundary imaginable. It happened on a bright, freezing Tuesday morning. I looked out my kitchen window and saw heavy construction equipment rolling directly across my grazing pasture. My heart did a hard, cold flip in my chest. I grabbed my coffee mug, pushed open the heavy wooden screen door, and sped out onto the porch. "What do you think you're doing?" I called out, my voice cutting sharply across the open field. Victoria slowly turned around. She didn't look guilty. She looked triumphant. "You've been given multiple warnings," she declared, lifting her chin with absolute arrogance. "The Whispering Pines board has authorized the immediate demolition of this unauthorized structure. Your farming days right next to our community are over." She was actually ordering my barn demolished. She thought she was completely untouchable. But what Victoria didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have factored into her delusional math, was that sitting right inside my kitchen, watching this entire illegal destruction stunt unfold through the window, was the county's chief land surveyor, who had just arrived with a stack of historical deeds. The heavy wooden screen door of my farmhouse swung back with a sharp, echoing crack that cut straight through the low rumble of idling construction engines and heavy steel tracks biting into the dirt. Marcus stepped out onto the porch. He wasn't wearing a hard hat or holding a clipboard. He had on his usual faded canvas field jacket, mud-caked boots, and a baseball cap pulled low over his forehead. To Victoria, who was completely blinded by her own suburban privilege, he looked like nothing more than an unpolished farmhand or a hired helper. She didn't even blink in his direction. Her eyes remained locked on me, gleaming with the self-righteous satisfaction of a corporate tyrant executing a master plan. "Is there an issue here?" Marcus asked, his voice low, steady, and dangerously calm as he slowly descended the weathered wooden porch steps. Victoria let out a sharp, dismissive huff, waving a laminated architectural packet dismissively in the air. "There is no issue for you to concern yourself with, farmhand. This parcel has been designated by the Whispering Pines Architectural Committee as a visual obstruction zone. The demolition order is fully authorized by our neighborhood master covenant." Marcus didn't stop walking until he reached the edge of the churned-up pasture grass. He cast a slow, deliberate glance at the massive orange bulldozer idling 50 feet from my barn, its steel blade resting menacingly against the tall grass. Then he looked down at the bright pink construction stakes hammered straight into my clover field, cutting right through my grandfather's historical fence line. Finally, he turned his gaze back to Victoria. "Ma'am," Marcus said, his tone perfectly even, "did you pull the county deed and an independent legal boundary survey on this specific parcel before you authorized heavy machinery on private agricultural dirt?" Victoria scoffed, planting her hands firmly on her hips. Her designer suit jacket stretched tight as she squared her shoulders in absolute disgust. "I don't need an independent survey. I am the president of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. Our master developer provided these blueprints, and our legal jurisdiction covers every square inch of land adjacent to our perimeter wall." The lead bulldozer operator, a weathered guy in a neon-reflective vest, shifted uncomfortably near the metal tracks. He leaned out of the open cab, staring nervously between Victoria and Marcus. "Look, lady," the operator interjected, his voice tight with hesitation. "Are you 100% sure this land isn't privately deeded? My company doesn't level historical barns on acreage without county sign-off. It's a massive legal liability if we cross a property line." Victoria whirled around to face the operator, her face flushing a deep, angry crimson. "I am telling you for the absolute last time, I take full legal responsibility. Drop that blade and tear this eyesore down right now, or I will ensure the Whispering Pines HOA blacklists your construction firm from every single commercial development in this county." The operator swallowed hard, gripped his control levers, and bit his lower lip. The massive hydraulic arms of the bulldozer hissed to life, and the heavy steel blade lowered another few inches toward the rich soil. I took a slow step forward, my hand resting casually in my jacket pocket. If that blade hit my barn's foundational timber, centuries of family history were going to be crushed into splinters. Before I could even open my mouth to issue a final warning, Marcus stepped directly into the path of the operating machinery. He didn't yell, he didn't rush. He simply reached into the inner pocket of his canvas field jacket, pulled out a thick leather folio, and flipped it open with a sharp, authoritative snap of his wrist. The polished gold medallion of the county chief land surveyor caught the bright morning light, flashing like a warning beacon over the grass. "Shut the engine down," Marcus commanded. The operator froze mid-motion, his hand hovering inches above the hydraulic controls. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him staring in absolute shock at the official government seal. "Chief," the operator choked out, his eyes glued to the gold badge. "Oh man, I didn't know." "You're about to find out," Marcus replied, oldly. Victoria, however, was entirely immune to reality. Her ego was so massive, so completely detached from municipal law, that she marched right up to Marcus and shoved a manicured finger right into his chest. "Put that fake prop away," Victoria shrieked, her voice cracking with fury. I don't care who you think you are. You are trespassing on an authorized neighborhood development zone. I'm calling the county sheriff right now, and I'm having both of you arrested for obstruction of community progress." Marcus looked down at her finger, then up into her wild, frantic eyes. A slow, terrifying smile spread across his face. "You want to call the sheriff, Victoria?" Marcus asked softly. "Good, because you won't even have to dial." He reached to his belt, keyed his heavy-duty handheld county radio, and spoke 3 words that changed the entire atmosphere of the morning. "Unit 4, roll up to the north pasture. We have an active property destruction in progress." From down the access road, through the open fields, the sharp, wailing siren of a county cruiser suddenly cut through the air. Victoria's triumphant smirk finally faltered, but instead of backing down, she did something that completely defied all human logic. The wail of the approaching siren bounced off the old timber fence line and echoed across the open fields. To any normal person, the sound of flashing red and blue lights tearing down a dirt farm road meant one thing: the game was completely over. But Victoria wasn't normal. She was an HOA president, a woman who genuinely believed her multi-million-dollar master deed superseded municipal law, county surveys, and basic human property rights. Instead of stepping back from the path of the bulldozer, she spun around and glared furiously at the terrified equipment operator. "Don't you dare cut that engine!" she screamed, her voice cracking over the heavy diesel rumble. "I am paying your company top dollar. Push that barn down right now, or I will personally ensure your contracting license is revoked across the entire state." The operator looked from Victoria to Marcus's gleaming gold badge, and then back to the steel tracks of his massive machine. He didn't hesitate for even a microsecond. "Lady, you're completely out of your mind," the operator snapped. He threw his control levers into neutral, slammed the emergency kill switch, and scrambled out of the open cab, leaping down onto the dirt. "I'm not catching a federal property destruction felony and losing my business for a suburban tyrant." He hurled his heavy yellow hard hat onto the ground, cursed under his breath, and began walking rapidly toward his flatbed trailer. Victoria stood entirely alone in the churned-up grass, her mouth dropping open in absolute disbelief as her construction crew abandoned her in broad daylight. "Cowards!" she shrieked, stamping her designer heel into the dirt. A split second later, a marked county sheriff's cruiser fishtailed off the asphalt access road, kicking up a massive wall of brown dust before slamming to a halt right behind the idle bulldozer. The door flew open, and Deputy Miller stepped out into the morning sun, his hand resting securely on his duty belt, his eyes scanning the chaotic scene. Victoria's face instantly lit up. The blind panic vanished, replaced once again by that toxic, manufactured sense of supreme entitlement. She thought the cavalry had finally arrived to rescue her. She marched right up to Deputy Miller, waving her arms in the air like a frantic air traffic controller. "Officer, thank heavens!" she cried out, putting on a masterclass of fake victimhood. "You need to arrest these 2 men immediately. They are trespassing on our community's designated visual zone, and they just harassed our legally contracted workers." Deputy Miller blinked against the morning glare. He looked at Victoria. Then he looked past her, spotting Marcus standing tall by the porch and me leaning casually against the railing. Miller's gaze shifted to Marcus's gleaming badge. The colour drained entirely from the deputy's face. The bright morning sunlight seemed to matter a whole lot less, as the gravity of who he was looking at completely took over. "Chief," Miller muttered, his voice tight and formal as he snapped straight to attention. "What's going on here, sir?" Victoria paused, her arms still raised mid-gesture. The sheer dissonance of the deputy addressing the unkempt, flannel-wearing farmhand as Chief finally short-circuited her brain. "What are you calling him that for?" Victoria shrieked, her voice pitching up into a frantic squeak. "Arrest them! I am the president of Whispering Pines. My master deed is law in this district." Marcus didn't blink. He took one slow step forward through the grass, his eyes locking onto Victoria with cold, absolute authority. "Deputy Miller," Marcus said quietly, every word cutting like glass through the morning air. Take this suspect into custody for criminal mischief and attempted destruction of private agricultural property. Miller didn't hesitate. He unclipped his steel handcuffs, stepped around Victoria's frozen form, and grabbed her arm. "Ma'am, turn around and put your hands behind your back," Miller ordered. For a fraction of a second, Victoria stared at the cold steel cuffs as if they were an optical illusion. Then, the realization of what was actually happening hit her like a freight train. She violently wrenched her arm out of Miller's grip. "Do not touch me!" she screamed, her mask of composure shattering completely. "You cannot arrest me! You don't know who I am! I own this entire valley!" And right then, in front of a county deputy, Victoria made the absolute worst mistake of her entire life. With a blind, feral shriek of pure rage, she wound up her arm and slapped Deputy Miller squarely across the face. The sharp, echoing smack sounded like a gunshot over the quiet hum of the countryside. The entire pasture went dead silent. Even the birds in the nearby trees seemed to stop singing. You do not strike a law enforcement officer, but you never strike a deputy in front of the chief land surveyor who controls every boundary marker, deed, and legal plat in the county. The silence that followed the slap was heavier than the summer heat pressing down on the fields. Victoria stood frozen with her hands still raised in the air, her chest heaving as she finally realized the catastrophic mistake she had just made. She had just assaulted a sworn county deputy on private agricultural land, right in front of the county's chief land surveyor. Ty Miller didn't even flinch. He didn't yell, and he didn't lose his temper. He simply wiped his cheek, his eyes narrowing into cold, unforgiving slits. Before Victoria could open her mouth to stutter an excuse, Miller moved with lightning speed. He grabbed her arm, spun her around with practiced efficiency, and slammed her against the hood of his sheriff's cruiser. The harsh, metallic click of the steel handcuffs, ratcheting tight around her wrists, sounded like a death knell for her suburban empire. "Let me go!" Victoria shrieked, her designer suit jacket scraping against the police car as she thrashed uselessly. "This is police brutality. The Whispering Pines HOA is going to sue this entire county into bankruptcy. You can't do this to me." Marcus walked up slowly, resting his hands in the pockets of his canvas jacket. He looked down at her with a calm, unbothered expression. "Victoria, you started out with a civil trespassing dispute," Marcus said quietly. "Then you upgraded it to attempted property destruction. And now, you've secured yourself a felony charge for assaulting a peace officer." Tears of pure, unadulterated fury began streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. She looked like a cornered animal, realizing that her multi-million-dollar subdivision and her laminated architectural packets couldn't save her anymore. "You're making a massive mistake," she sobbed, her voice cracking as Miller hoisted her upward and opened the back door of the cruiser. "You'll never get away with harassing our neighborhood. The entire board will have your badges by sundown." She thought the Whispering Pines Board of Directors was her personal militia. She thought they would rally behind her, pool their money, and wage an endless legal war to avenge their fearless leader. What Victoria didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have factored into her delusional math, was that the Whispering Pines HOA board was about to discover a horrifying truth, because the moment Victoria was hauled away to the county jail in a flurry of flashing red and blue lights, I didn't feel relief. I felt anticipation. I turned around, walked back up the wooden steps of my porch, and pulled a long, heavy PVC tube out from behind the pillar. Marcus watched me, a knowing grin spreading across his face. Inside that tube was a legally certified, court-approved land survey that had been sitting in my safe for over a year. You see, 2 years ago, when the developers first broke ground on Whispering Pines, they wanted a grand, sweeping entrance, a dedicated turning lane, and an automated visitor kiosk. And Victoria, in her infinite wisdom, decided that the best place to build their multi-$1,000 entryway and perimeter wall was right at the edge of our acreage, ignoring the actual historical boundary markers of my family's farm. She hadn't just placed a few construction stakes on my property. She had built the entire front entrance, the security gate, and a massive chunk of their neighborhood's primary access road squarely on my family's private land. For months, I had watched them pour concrete. I had watched them lay expensive brickwork. I had watched them erect their grand pillars, and I didn't say a single word. I let them spend their entire HOA reserve fund building a luxury entrance on my dirt. And now that Victoria was sitting in a holding cell facing felony charges, there was no one left to hide the truth from the rest of the neighborhood. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, the emergency group chat for Whispering Pines was melting down into absolute, unadulterated chaos. Word had already rippled through the ultra-luxury subdivision like wildfire. Their fearless, tyrannical HOA president had been hauled away in handcuffs by the county sheriff after committing a literal felony. But that wasn't even the worst news hitting the residents. The real nightmare began when the county surveyor and I walked right out to the front entrance of their pristine subdivision, carrying 2 heavy iron padlocks and a formal legal notice. Within minutes, 3 frantic members of the HOA board came speeding down the main street in their luxury European SUVs, slamming on their brakes and piling out into the gravel. They looked like deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming freight train. "Wait, wait, wait! Stop right there!" shouted Arthur, the vice president of the board, waving his hands frantically as he jogged toward us. He was a high-powered corporate lawyer, but right now he looked like a panicked toddler. "What is the meaning of this? You can't just padlock the neighborhood gate." Marcus stepped up beside me, flashing his official badge, just so there was zero confusion about who was running the show. "Actually, Arthur, he can," Marcus said smoothly, "because that gate, the stone pillars, and the land they sit on don't belong to Whispering Pines." Arthur blinked, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the summer breeze. "That's ridiculous. The developers built this entrance 2 years ago. It's part of our approved subdivision plan." I unrolled the certified county survey right across the hood of my truck, pointing directly to the official boundary pins hidden beneath their manicured landscaping. "Your developers cut corners to save a buck," I told him, my voice completely level. "They didn't pay for an independent land survey. They just guessed where the property line was and poured concrete straight onto my family's generational ranch." I tapped the legal document with my finger. "Every single brick of this grand entrance, the automated visitor kiosk, the security cameras, and the first 100 feet of your main access road sit entirely on Parcel A, my land." The color completely vanished from Arthur's face. He looked at the gate, then at the survey, and then back at me. The mathematical realization hit him like a brick wall. Because the structure was permanently built onto private property without an easement, it legally belonged to the landowner. To me. You're landlocking the entire neighborhood," Arthur whispered, horror dawning in his eyes. 80 multi-million-dollar homes. No one can drive in or out without crossing your land." "Correct," I replied with a calm smile. "Which means you are officially trespassing every time you drive home from the grocery store." The rest of the board members arrived just in time to hear that little nugget of information. Instantly, the high and mighty corporate executives dissolved into a chorus of desperate begging and panic. They knew that if word got out to the rest of the neighborhood that their multi-million-dollar homes were landlocked by an angry rancher, property values would instantly plummet to zero. They didn't want to fight. They wanted to negotiate, and negotiation with a pissed-off rural property owner isn't cheap. By the following week, the Whispering Pines board held an emergency neighborhood meeting. Without Victoria there to bully them, the residents voted overwhelmingly to strip her of all remaining authority and throw her completely under the bus. They also voted to accept my terms to avoid a catastrophic legal war. Instead of tearing down their multi-million-dollar entrance and their demolition-bound structures, I allowed them to keep it, under one condition. Since they wanted to order my barn demolished and fine me for existing, I decided to return the favor on a corporate scale. The HOA was forced to pay a massive, non-negotiable 7-figure permanent easement fee directly to me, giving them legal permission to use my road to access their subdivision. The payout completely obliterated their reserve funds, forcing a crushing special assessment fee on every single household in Whispering Pines. Victoria's reign of terror ended in total financial and social ruin. Facing a felony assault charge and a multi-million-dollar civil lawsuit from her own neighbors for gross negligence, she was forced to sell her luxury mansion at a massive loss and leave the county in complete disgrace. As for me, I used the HOA's hard-earned cash to restore my grandfather's historic barn to absolute perfection, build a brand-new workshop, and pave a private driveway that bypasses their subdivision entirely. Whenever I see a luxury SUV drive past my newly locked security gates, I just smile, knowing that every single one of my wealthy neighbors is essentially paying me rent just to drive home.